Thank you for this opportunity to speak about how the family law system has treated me and my perspective on fatherlessness. 7 years ago, I was married to who I thought was my best friend. We had two beautiful daughters, 5 and 7, and a lifestyle I was quite proud to provide for. One day when I returned home from work, I found that my house was empty of furniture and clothes, my family was gone, my dog was gone, our bank accounts were emptied of tens of thousands of dollars. My wife had run away without any warning or explanation, and like Kevin McAllister's experience in the movie Home Alone, my family simply disappeared. She hasn't spoken to me since, but after years of fighting in court and through state agencies, I now have my children every other week, and while everything may look okay now, it did not come easy. Despite having taken all of our money, I learned that my wife was using a legal aid service funded by public and private grants to zealously represent her while attempting to steal away my entire life. They even made multiple attempts to restrain me from my own children and my home. There was no domestic violence. My point is that services paid for with our tax dollars were weaponized against me, and in my story, this was only the beginning. Also worth mentioning, we talk about how legislation is actually applied. The legislation that one thinks would protect people from false allegations of domestic violence, the supposed third-degree felony, it's completely unenforceable, leaving the targeted parent to defend himself from the indefensible, blindsided, without similar legal support from public grants, and immediately assumed to be guilty before proven innocent. Today, I'm an advocate. I can safely say that my struggles with family courts, Florida courts, and court administration and government agencies have shaped my attitudes and hurled me into seeking greater understandings of their inner workings for myself, my children, and every other similarly situated family. I have experienced firsthand how unwilling the family law system is to demonstrate flexibility, schedule timely hearings, enforce orders, return phone calls, or otherwise share communication to share agency policies, and to seek clarity or correct misunderstandings. With impunity, I have seen judges, court administrators, agencies of the executive branch, and local governments misinterpret, ignore, or misapply laws, practices, parenting plans, and definitions for terms as simple as registering parent. I've witnessed it. Otherwise qualified members of the civil service shy away from answering questions about my children with, "It's inappropriate for me to answer your questions about your child, and you should hire an attorney." I have found myself being dismissed by these same civil servants when I attempt to explain the difference between legal information and legal advice, and why we're all entitled to legal information without the need for a lawyer. I can only guess how many actors in the family law system are willfully ignorant and refuse to consider or discuss reason, and as a result, how many children and their families are negatively affected. Regretfully, my story is a common one. Florida's family law system is a dumpster fire. There are federal and state-funded programs that intend to help children and families that have the effect of ripping families apart. The overarching problem is lack of oversight, followed by apathy, learned helplessness, and incompetence. I have seen firsthand, and I have heard many times over, our laws are not being followed or applied evenly by private state-funded agencies or the judiciary or state agencies or even school boards. The organizations are unmonitored, and the laws that govern them are not enforced or even unenforceable. For split families, it is well understood that when laws are not followed correctly by local courts, state agencies, and school boards, it has the effect of separating parents from their children and their money. This problem is so large and so very unchecked because citizens have no ability to enforce their rights, complain to an officer, petition a court, seek a writ of mandamus, or insist on accommodations protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm confident many of the failures I see in the system are consequences of unfunded mandates from federal programs and the criteria that states need to meet in order to receive federal funding. These requirements get all the states' attention to perform those services that are linked to federal accountability, but then do not necessarily pay attention to providing the services that are not linked to the federal audits, despite legislation. What's more is, while the imbalance of services fails Florida's families, these agencies do not receive any performance audits by the state itself to identify to the legislature the inadequacy and ineffectiveness of the programs, no less the requirement to comply with the law. My crusade is not partisan. The system has been failing for so long that it has created an underwhelming sense of indifference among those thousands employed by it. It doesn't self-govern, and because it doesn't pretend to, it has been overrun by bad actors. It is now a world in which, to these agencies, a family is worth more financially in conflict than in harmony, much like a whale is worth more dead than alive. And as long as it has the appearance that the family law system goes unchecked, families will continue to be destroyed with the same insensitivity as when corporations kill whales, destroy trees, mine the earth, and pull oil out of the ground, even though we know it's destroying lives, the country, and the planet, and we know that it's going to leave a worse world for future generations. Thank you so much for your time. I welcome any opportunity to continue this conversation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes,
Thank you, Chair Altman. And it's not so much of a question, but more so of a comment. I wanted to thank Mr. Felder for coming and just sharing his story as a parent, being that we were talking about fatherlessness and the importance of having the father involved in a child's life. I thought that his story would be somewhat compelling, and although I learned a few things today based on your comments, I really do think that the work that we're about to do around fatherlessness will be a positive direction for us to take, and hopefully his example of what he went through in his experience will help lead us to be able to clarify some of these policies, some of these laws that conflict with each other, so that then it can become a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more clearer as to what are the expectations. We know that relationships and marriages these days, they're just, well, they have challenges, and sometimes the result, it winds up in divorce. And when there's children involved, again, it's a nonpartisan issue when it comes to children. And I wish that we as legislators, and this is a comment sidebar, would take the politics and the political comments away from the work that we have here. And so I just wanted to thank you for coming and sharing your story and having the courage to speak with us, as this is your house as well. And it's important that we hear from our constituents that have these challenges, because at the end of the day, we are tasked with making some really arduous decisions and meaningful legislation that affect our children. And it's not their fault. They're here. So that's why this work, I feel, is so extremely important. And again, thank you very much for coming and sharing your truth and your story. And hopefully it'll help us lead into again, aligning these pieces of legislation together, break down these silos, and get down to a really good piece of policy that we can all be proud of, and not hurt anyone involved, and find a win-win situation for families that find themselves in this situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Bolsey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I know that a test often becomes a testimony, and I have to apologize, because a lot of times in this committee and others, when we talk about fatherless children, I think of fathers who are incarcerated or fathers that walk away. That is the case, I'm sure, in some instances, but I've not really thought about the fathers that are left behind. So it shed a different light on that subject to me today. My question to you is, it's a broad subject. Sounds like there's a lot that needs to be tackled. What would, in your opinion, if you had to take one bite out of the apple, what would be the first bite?
I wish it were a smaller bite, but in speaking to the Auditor General's General Counsel and my research of Section 11.45 of the Florida statutes, what we need to do is introduce legislation that requires the Auditor General to conduct what they call a program-level performance audit that incorporates all the existing public programs, activities, and functions when there is a family dispute or a child lives with less than both biological parents, when both biological parents are living. Just an audit.
So you're ready for that question, I think. Any way you could send that to us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good, quick, concise answer. I have a question. How long ago did this happen, and how old are your children now?
7 years ago. There are 11 and 13 today.
Okay. And when did you get the opportunity to be with your children? How long did that take?
Initially weeks, and that was long after the the sheriff's deputy and DCF had determined that there wasn't any reason why the children should not be with me. It was a matter of the courts, and that documents had to be filed, and the hearings had to be scheduled, and the system does not move quickly.
And how long did that happen, did you say?
It was weeks before I saw them. It was close to a year and a half before anything was documented.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking your time and your testimony. And yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to state, you know, we hear his story, but this happens every day. And once the kids are caught in the system, they usually spend 4 to 5 years in the system, no fault of their own. Parents get involved, parents get upset, one say this and the other one said that, and the children are the one that's caught in the middle. And when we as legislators sit here and make these decisions on glass houses and don't understand a one-parent household, we don't understand a low-income household, and we make those decisions, we are hurting the families. And because you are poor or low income does not make you not be a good parent. Perfect example. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may
Thank
add
you.
to that,
Sure.
and I have a list very, very long, but I just, again, I want to address the idea that just because it's in legislation, I'll use as an example, I showed up to school one day to visit my children for lunch, and I was turned away. And I asked why I was turned away, and they said, you don't have any access to your children. You have no rights to your children. Actually, my father had flown in from Texas specifically to see the kids, and so he came here for a wasted trip, wasn't able to see the kids. And I brought my court order, and the school said, sorry, the mom is the registering parent. There's nothing in the court order that says that she's the registering parent. There's nothing in state law that defines a registering parent. There's nothing in school board policy, Sarasota County, nothing in school board policy that defines a registering parent. The school board, and my understanding, my research is that 66 of the 67 county school boards have made a decision that whomever fills out the paperwork is deemed the registering parent, which has the effect of giving one parent, they're effectively a court. They're giving one parent rights and they're taking rights from another parent. It took multiple trips to a judge privately to ask, would you please sign this one-page order that says that my rights have not been taken away, because other than that, otherwise, the school will not give me any access. Mom had crossed me off the list at school. I had no access to teachers, no access to school records, no access to report cards, simply because she was miffed at me and crossed me off the list. And there was no mechanism. That's again, I could talk about this for a long time. I tried to keep this 5 minutes. But there are no mechanisms in place to enforce these things. And they have the effect of separating parents from their children. And if the mom at any given time is the majority parent, it's separating the father from his children.
Well, we should ask you to send us your list as well, too. I'd like to be helpful. Okay, thank you so much.